when Daniel told me he wanted a divorce. I remember the sound of the clock ticking louder than his voice. It was a Thursday evening in early spring, and the sunlight through the window had just begun to fade into that golden color I always loved. I stood in the kitchen, washing the last of the dinner plates, and I could feel him hovering behind me, restless, like a man trying to summon courage. He cleared his throat once, twice, before finally saying my name. When I turned, I saw it in his eyes before he spoke. The guilt, the nervous flicker, the way he couldn't quite look at me directly. My heart sank even before the words left his mouth. "I think we need to talk," he said, his voice strangely formal, like he was addressing a stranger. I dried my hands on a towel and leaned against the counter. "About what?" I asked, though I already knew. The air between us was thick with everything unspoken, the late nights, the secretive phone calls, the faint scent of perfume that wasn't mine lingering on his clothes. Still, hearing him say it out loud felt like being pushed off a cliff. "I'm not happy anymore," he said. "I've met someone." The words came out fast, like he wanted to get it over with. My heart pounded in my chest, but I didn't let him see me break. I had spent too many years building this home, this life, to crumble in front of him. "Someone?" I asked quietly, my voice almost calm. "Who?" He hesitated for a moment, then looked away. "Her name's Jessica. She's younger. She understands me in ways you don't anymore." That last sentence sliced deeper than he knew. I looked around at the kitchen I had designed, the family photos on the wall, the dinner still steaming on the table. "She understands you," I repeated, almost laughing at the absurdity. "You've been with her for what, a few months?" "I've been with you for 15 years, Daniel." He tried to justify it, saying things like we had grown apart, that he didn't mean for it to happen, but I didn't want to hear it. My ears rang with the words asterisk, younger asterisk, and asterisk someone else. Asterisk, I wanted to scream, to throw the plate in my hand, to demand how he could do this to me after everything we'd built together. But instead, I placed the dish gently in the rack and said, "Okay." He blinked, confused. "Okay," he repeated. "That's all you have to say." I nodded. "If you want out, Daniel, then go. But remember, you don't get to walk away clean. Actions have consequences." That night, after he packed a bag and left, I sat in the living room, staring at the walls. The silence was deafening. The house felt foreign, like it was holding its breath. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't, not yet. I thought about the years I'd spent supporting him when his business failed, the nights I stayed awake helping him brainstorm new ideas, the weekends I gave up to clean, cook, and make sure our son's life was stable, and now he was throwing it all away for some fleeting excitement with a girl barely older than our babysitter. I made myself a cup of tea and walked through each room of the house. The family room where we'd celebrated birthdays, the hallway lined with our vacation photos, the nursery that became our son's bedroom. All of it was mine in ways Daniel never understood. This house wasn't just a building. It was my inheritance, the only thing my grandmother left me before she passed. It had been in my family for 3 generations. When Daniel and I married, I let him move in because it felt right to share my world with the man I loved. I didn't put his name on the deed. My lawyer had advised against it, saying, "Keep your inheritance separate, just in case." I remember laughing back then, saying, "Oh, Daniel would never betray me." How naive I had been. 2 weeks later, the divorce papers came. Clean, efficient, emotionless. He had a lawyer draft them up quickly, probably thinking I'd be too heartbroken to resist. But I surprised him. I signed every page with a steady hand, and even smiled when I handed them back. "You should be happy," I said. "You're free now." He looked at me warily, as if waiting for me to explode. But I didn't. I wanted him to feel comfortable, complacent, even, because I had already begun to plan my next move. When he mentioned he wanted to keep the house for the kids' stability, I nearly laughed out loud. He actually thought he had a claim to it. I kept my expression neutral and said, "If it's for the kids, I'll think about it." He nodded, relieved, and I could almost see the gears turning in his mind. He was already envisioning a new life with Jessica under my roof. I let him think it was possible because I wanted to watch his confidence grow before it all came crashing down. A few days after the divorce was finalized, I saw his car parked in the driveway again. Only this time, another car was there too, a shiny red convertible I didn't recognize. I felt a bitter amusement rise in my chest. Jessica had officially moved in. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of them laughing together as they carried in boxes, as if they were living out some fairy tale. The sight stung for a moment, but it also fueled something fierce inside me. My son, who stayed with me every other weekend, told me bits and pieces about their life. Dad says Jessica's helping redecorate. He said one afternoon, "They painted over the mural you made in my room, but it's okay." I felt my throat tighten, but I forced a smile. "That's fine, sweetheart. You can help me make a new one here." When he wasn't looking, I wiped a tear away. That mural had taken me days to finish, hand-painted trees, stars, and clouds, but now it was gone, just like the version of Daniel I once loved. While he played house with his new wife, I went to my lawyer. We reviewed the deed and confirmed what I already knew. The house was entirely in my name. No joint ownership, no claim from Daniel. My lawyer gave me a knowing look. "If you want to make a move, now's the time," she said. "The market's hot, and with your location, you could make a small fortune." I smiled. "Let's do it." We listed the house quietly, without fanfare. The development company that had been eyeing the area for months made an offer almost immediately, well above market value. I signed the papers within a week. By the time Daniel was posting pictures of him and Jessica having breakfast in our cozy home, the deal was already sealed. Still, I didn't want to just sell the house out of spite. I wanted closure, peace, and a clean break. I took the money and began planning my next chapter. A small villa by the coast had always been my dream. Somewhere far away from the noise, from memories, from betrayal. The thought of it made me smile every night before I slept. Then, one morning, my phone buzzed. It was Daniel. "Hey, we need to talk," he said, his tone sharp and nervous. "The new mortgage statement came, and there's something wrong. It says the property isn't under my name. What's going on?" I leaned back on my couch, suppressing a laugh. "Because it's not." I said simply, "It never was." There was a pause. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice rising. "I live here." I smiled correction. "You're staying there for now." That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and looked out at the stars. I felt lighter than I had in years. For 15 years, I'd been the one sacrificing my time, my energy, my dreams, to keep our family together. And he repaid that with betrayal. Now I wasn't just getting even. I was reclaiming what was mine. A few days later, the real estate company finalized the sale. The paperwork was done, the funds cleared. I transferred most of it into a trust for my son's future, then booked a flight to visit a coastal town where my new home awaited. I didn't even bother telling Daniel. Why should I? The new owners would be delivering that message soon enough, and I wanted them to handle it officially. I knew it would be chaos once he found out, and I won't lie, it satisfied me a little. Not because I wanted to hurt him, but because I wanted him to understand what it felt like to lose everything you took for granted. I had loved Daniel with all I had, but love without respect is a hollow thing. When he brought another woman into my home, into my memories, he made his choice. I walked through the house one last time before the handover. Every creak in the floorboards, every corner held pieces of me. My laughter, my pain, my years of patience. I touched the wall in the kitchen, where we once marked our son's height, and whispered goodbye. Then I locked the door, slid the keys into an envelope for the agent, and walked away without looking back. For the first time in years, I felt powerful. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't seek revenge through anger. I simply acted with quiet precision. I had turned pain into purpose, heartbreak into independence. And as I drove away that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in gold and crimson, I realized something profound. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is not in destruction, but in liberation. He thought he'd taken everything from me, but all along he was living on borrowed ground mine. The morning the call came, the sky outside my apartment was soft and bright, a new kind of calm that I had grown to love since the divorce. I had learned to start my mornings slowly, a cup of coffee, a quiet breakfast by the window, a few minutes scrolling through messages from my son. Life wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful. And then the phone rang. I looked at the screen and saw Daniel's name flashing across it. I hadn't heard from him in weeks. For a brief second, I wondered if something had happened to our son, but then I remembered it wasn't his weekend. He was with me, which meant this call had nothing to do with concern. It had to be about the house. I answered calmly, "Hello, where are you?" His voice was sharp, panicked, and angry. "You need to explain what's going on with the house. I just got a notice from some company saying they're the new owners. They're telling us to leave." I could almost see his face turning red, the vein in his forehead throbbing like it always did when he didn't get his way. I took a slow sip of my coffee. "That's correct," I said quietly. "I sold it." There was a pause, a thick, stunned silence. Then his voice exploded through the line. "You what? You can't do that. We live here." I could hear Jessica shouting in the background, her voice shrill and frantic, demanding to know what was happening. I leaned back in my chair and smiled faintly. "Actually," I said, keeping my tone even, "you lived there, past tense." He sputtered, searching for words, his anger tangled with disbelief. "You had no right, Daniel." I interrupted, my voice steady. "That house was never yours. You knew that. You just chose to ignore it. It was mine long before I ever met you, and now it's gone, sold, legally and completely." I could almost hear his breath catch as the realization sank in. He stammered something about lawyers, about how I couldn't just throw him out. I didn't bother replying. Instead, I said, "You might want to start packing. The new owners are taking possession today." Then, before he could respond, I hung up. I sat there for a while, the phone still in my hand, and let the silence wash over me. I should have felt guilty, maybe. After all, we'd built years of memories in that house. But I didn't. I felt liberated. I thought of how easily he'd replaced me, how proudly he'd flaunted his new wife in the very space I had nurtured our family. I thought about all those nights I'd spent alone while he worked late. All the times he dismissed my feelings, the way he made me believe I was the problem. Now, for once, I held the power. By noon, my lawyer called to confirm that everything was finalized. The development company had wired the payment, and the new title had been transferred. The paperwork was ironclad. "Daniel had no claim. They'll likely show up today," she said. "Are you prepared for that?" I smiled. "Oh, I've been ready for a long time." Later that afternoon, I got a text from a neighbor who still lived on the street where the house stood. "Asterisk, you won't believe this," asterisk she wrote, followed by a picture. There it was, my old driveway, but now Daniel and Jessica's belongings were scattered across it. Boxes, furniture, bags, Even their fancy red convertible was parked halfway on the lawn. A couple of movers stood near the porch, clearly uncomfortable as Daniel argued with one of the men in suits, one of the developers. I stared at the photo for a long moment. Daniel looked small, not physically, but in presence, the kind of small that happens when arrogance collapses. Jessica was standing off to the side, her hair messy, wearing expensive lounge clothes that looked out of place against the chaos. Her mouth was twisted into a mix of shock and fury. I could almost hear her saying, "She can't do this to us," but I could. And I did. The developers had been kind enough to let them retrieve their personal items, but the locks were being changed by sunset. The property had been sold as is, and demolition was scheduled for the following month. I had made sure every detail was handled ethically, cleanly, without loopholes. There was no space for Daniel's pleas or manipulations this time. He called again that evening. I didn't answer. Instead, he left a series of voicemails, first angry, then pleading. "You can't just leave us on the street," he said in one, his voice strained. "We have nowhere to go," Jessica's crying. "Please, can we at least have a few more days?" I listened to all of them without emotion. The same man who once said I was too old to understand him, who brought another woman into my home as if I were a ghost, was now begging for the mercy he never gave me. I deleted the messages, but something inside me wasn't satisfied yet, not out of revenge, but closure. I needed to see it with my own eyes. So, as the sun began to set, I got into my car and drove to the old neighborhood. The sky was painted in streaks of orange and pink, the kind of beauty you notice only when you've stopped rushing to please everyone else. When I turned onto the familiar street, I saw the house from a distance. My house, my grandmother's house. Only now it looked different, smaller, somehow. Maybe it was because I had grown, or maybe it was because I no longer saw it through the haze of attachment. Daniel's car was parked on the curb, trunk open. A few boxes sat beside it, the last remnants of his new life. Jessica was pacing in the yard, her phone in her hand, shouting at someone. Daniel stood by the gate, his face pale, watching the developer's team finish the lock change. The movers were gone. The lights inside the house were off. It looked empty again and at peace. I parked across the street and sat quietly, watching. They hadn't seen me. For a few moments, I just observed the scene. Daniel was arguing again, his voice desperate, his gestures wild. Jessica finally threw her hands in the air, yelling something at him before storming off toward the car. They were unraveling right in front of me. The perfect, shiny life they had flaunted was disintegrating in real time. I should have felt triumphant, and maybe part of me did, but mostly I felt done with the pain, done with the memories, done with trying to understand how love could turn into this. A light breeze passed through the street, carrying the faint scent of spring. I thought of how many mornings I'd spent on that porch, drinking tea, waiting for Daniel to come home from late meetings. I thought of how many nights I'd prayed he'd see me again, notice me again, love me again, but the woman who once begged for his attention no longer existed. She was gone, replaced by someone who finally remembered her worth. I rolled down the window and watched as Jessica got into her car, slamming the door. Daniel shouted after her, but she didn't look back. She sped off down the street, tires screeching, leaving him standing alone in the driveway. That was the image I wanted to remember. Daniel, alone, surrounded by the wreckage of his choices. Not because I wanted him to suffer, but because it was the truth. Actions have consequences, and this was his. I drove away quietly, the city lights starting to twinkle in the distance. By the time I reached home, I felt an incredible calm settle over me. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on the balcony, and looked up at the stars. The universe, I thought, has an extraordinary way of balancing itself. The next morning, I woke to another message from my lawyer confirming that the transaction was complete and irreversible. The developers had taken full possession. Daniel's frantic calls had now turned into silence. I knew he'd find a place eventually. He always landed on his feet. But this time, it wouldn't be on my back. I spent that day reflecting. I remembered the first time I walked through that house as a little girl, holding my grandmother's hand. I remembered painting the kitchen with Daniel when we first got married, both of us covered in streaks of yellow paint, laughing. And then I remembered the last time, the coldness in his eyes, the emptiness in his words. The house had seen everything, our beginning, our middle, and our end. Now it was time to let it go. In the following weeks, I finalized the purchase of my new home, a small villa overlooking the ocean. The air smelled like salt and freedom. The walls were white and open, sunlight spilling into every corner. It was nothing like the house I had before. No shared memories, no ghosts, no hidden pain, just mine. When my son came to visit, he ran through the halls, laughing, his voice echoing against the sea breeze. "Mom, this place is amazing," he said, his eyes shining. I smiled and hugged him tightly. "It's a new start," I told him. For both of us, later that evening, after he'd gone to bed, I stepped outside onto the terrace. The moon was bright, reflecting off the waves. I thought about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the loss, the revenge, the renewal. Life had taken so much from me, but it had given me something greater in return, strength. Daniel had built his new life on something that wasn't his, something he thought he could control. But I had learned that power doesn't come from possession, it comes from peace. I didn't need to ruin him. I just needed to free myself. As the night deepened, I whispered to the wind, "Thank you. Thank you to the pain that taught me resilience. Thank you to the betrayal that led me here. And thank you to the woman I became. The one who finally realized that walking away doesn't mean losing. It means winning with grace." And somewhere far away, in a city street filled with noise and regret, Daniel probably sat wondering how everything had slipped through his fingers. But that was no longer my story. My story was the ocean, the freedom, the calm, because in the end I didn't just sell a house. I closed a chapter and finally opened my own. I drove back to the old neighborhood just after dusk, the sky bruised with streaks of violet and gray. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, though I wasn't sure why. The sale was done, the papers were signed, the house no longer mine. Yet a part of me felt drawn there, as if I needed to see the ending with my own eyes, not for revenge, not for satisfaction, but for something deeper. Closure? When I turned onto the familiar street, the headlights swept across the front yard of what had once been my home. The sight made me slow down. The porch light was off, but the faint glow of a car's interior illuminated two silhouettes sitting inside. Daniel and Jessica. Their faces were dimly lit by the dashboard, tension drawn across their features. She was turned away from him, her arms crossed, while he leaned forward with his head in his hands. Even from across the road, I could sense the heaviness in the air. The silence between them looked louder than any argument. I parked a little distance away and sat quietly in the dark, watching. The house stood there behind them, stripped of life. The windows reflected nothing. The laughter, the warmth, the scent of dinners and candles and family, all gone. I realized that what I had once called home was now just a shell, and somehow that realization didn't hurt. It felt right. That house had seen too many of my tears, too many nights of pretending everything was fine. It was time it stood empty. Through the windshield, I saw Jessica start to cry. Her shoulders shook, and she turned toward Daniel, her voice raised just enough that I caught fragments of it through the open window. "You said she couldn't do this. You said this place was yours." Daniel didn't answer. He stared out toward the street, his jaw clenched, his expression hollow. For once, he had no defense, no excuses, no way to charm his way out. I watched as he reached for her hand, but she pulled away. A moment later, she shoved open the car door and stormed out, her heels clacking sharply against the pavement. Daniel followed her, calling her name, but she didn't stop. She threw her hands in the air, shouting, "I can't do this. You ruined everything." Then she walked off into the night, leaving him standing alone by the curb. It was almost poetic, in a way. The same man who once walked out on me with a suitcase and a promise of a better life was now standing in front of the ruins of his choices, abandoned, humiliated, lost. But I didn't feel triumph. I felt stillness. He turned slowly and looked up at the house. For a moment, I thought he might see me sitting there, hidden in the shadows. But his eyes were elsewhere, somewhere deep within himself, maybe realizing for the first time that he wasn't the hero of his own story. He lingered for a long time, his hands shoved into his pockets, his head bowed. Then he walked to his car, sat down heavily in the driver's seat, and just stayed there, unmoving. I rolled my window down slightly, letting the night air drift in. The cool breeze carried the scent of the rain that would soon fall. I thought of all the years I had stood on that porch, waiting for him to come home. How many times had I made excuses for him? How many times had I convinced myself that love meant endurance? I had believed that being a good wife meant sacrificing until there was nothing left of me. But now, sitting there in the quiet street, I saw clearly how wrong that was. Sometimes love doesn't ask you to stay. Sometimes it begs you to walk away. I started the car and drove off before he could notice me. As the streetlights blurred past, memories began to surface, our wedding day, his smile when we first brought our son home, the laughter that once filled our kitchen. I had loved him with everything I had, and I wasn't ashamed of that. Loving someone isn't the mistake. Holding on after they've stopped deserving it is. By the time I reached my apartment, it was raining softly. I stood on the balcony, watching the drops streak down the glass, and for the first time in years, I felt like the storm wasn't inside me anymore. It was out there, washing away what was left of a life I no longer needed to carry. Over the next few weeks, I settled into my new rhythm. My son came to visit, his laughter filling the small space that I was slowly turning into a home. He didn't ask many questions about his father, though I could tell he knew more than he let on. Children always do. One evening, while helping me unpack, he said quietly, "Dad's staying at Grandma's. He and Jessica broke up." I nodded, folding another towel. "Sometimes things don't work out," I said. He looked at me for a long time, then asked, "Are you mad?" I thought about it. The old me would have said yes. The pain had been sharp once, like a wound that refused to heal, but now I just felt free. "No," I said softly, "not anymore." After he went to bed, I sat by the window and opened my journal, something I hadn't done since the divorce began. I started writing, not about anger or loss, but about strength, about how sometimes life takes everything from you so that you can rebuild from the ground up, about how pain isn't punishment, it's preparation. With the money from the sale, I bought a small villa by the sea. The moment I stepped through its doors, I knew it was the right choice. The space was open, bright, filled with air and possibility. The ocean was visible from every window, stretching endlessly toward the horizon. It was quiet here, and in that quiet I found myself again. The first morning I woke there, the sunlight poured in through the curtains, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Real peace. No guilt, no fear, no waiting for the next heartbreak. Just me, breathing in the sound of waves and the scent of salt. My son visited often, and we filled the villa with new memories, baking cookies, playing board games, watching movies late into the night. I painted again, something I hadn't done since college. Bright colors, bold strokes, art that spoke of freedom. Every wall of that house became a reflection of my healing. Sometimes I'd stand on the balcony at sunset, a cup of tea in my hand, watching the sky burn gold and pink. I'd think of Daniel then, not with bitterness, but with a strange kind of gratitude. If he hadn't betrayed me, I might never have learned how strong I could be. I might have spent the rest of my life waiting for someone else to define my worth. But because he broke me, I learned how to rebuild myself better. One evening, months later, I received a letter. It was from Daniel. The envelope was plain, no return address, just my name written in his familiar handwriting. For a moment, I considered throwing it away, but curiosity won. I opened it. Inside, his words were brief. He wrote that he was sorry not for leaving, not for falling in love with someone else, but for underestimating me. He said he finally understood what it meant to lose something you can't replace. He ended it with, "I hope you're happy. You deserve to be." I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my journal, not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder. Some apologies aren't meant to reopen wounds. They're meant to close them for good. That night, as the moon rose high over the water, I went for a walk along the beach. The sand was cool beneath my feet, and the waves lapped gently at the shore. I felt weightless. I thought of everything that had led me here, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the courage it took to start over. Life had tested me in ways I never imagined, but it had also rewarded me with something no man could ever give, the peace of knowing who I truly was. Sometimes I whispered to the sea, "You did the right thing," because in truth I had. I didn't destroy him out of cruelty. I simply reclaimed what was mine, my home, my pride, my power. And when he was forced to stand outside those locked doors, surrounded by the ruins of his choices, I hoped he finally understood the lesson life had tried to teach him. Don't build your happiness on someone else's foundation. Years from now, maybe he'll remember me as the woman who walked away without shouting, who didn't seek revenge through chaos, but through grace. And maybe he'll realize that the moment I let go was the moment I truly won. I still drive by the old neighborhood sometimes when I visit the city. The house is gone now, replaced by tall glass buildings, new and modern, full of life and light. I stop for a minute, looking at where it used to stand, and I smile. Because that's how life works. You lose something, it changes form, and then you realize you were never meant to hold it forever. Back at the villa, my evenings are quiet. I read by candlelight, paint when I feel inspired, and sometimes dance barefoot across the floor when the mood strikes. I am alone, but never lonely. I have learned that solitude is not emptiness, it is freedom. And every so often, when the sea wind brushes my face and the waves crash against the rocks, I think of that final night, Daniel sitting in his car, staring at the home that was no longer his. I remember the way he looked, small against the shadows, his arrogance washed away, and I thank life for giving me the courage to walk away without hate, because, in the end, I didn't need revenge to win. My peace was my victory. My silence was my closure. My happiness, that was my justice. And as the stars spread across the ocean's reflection, I whispered to the night, "You took my heart, but I took my life back." And that was more than enough.